Hello, everybody. My name's James. Welcome to another Planet FPL Fan View podcast, where I welcome one of our correspondents onto the pod to discuss current matters at his club. But before I introduce him, I need to timestamp this. It's Tuesday night because his club doesn't have a manager currently, but they also might do for a little while longer. It's Jack Toner, our Burnley correspondent. How are you, Jack?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Glad to be back. I thought it'd be a little bit longer than this, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago since it
yeah,
felt like you were sitting here and me and you were joking to Mark Sothers about him taking Vincent Kompany. Well, we got that wrong, didn't we? Oh, what if a club like Forest come in for Vincent Kompany? And we had this big discussion about, well, last summer Tottenham and Chelsea were apparently interesting company. That sort of job wouldn't come up now, would it, Jack? No,
yeah,
an even
bizarre.
bigger one. You're here, obviously, to talk about Vincent Kompany and what's next for Burnley. I think I probably don't want to put words in your mouth, but you understand what's happened, right?
Yeah, I think it's a weird one because I can't ever think I can sit here as a Burnley fan and begrudge anyone, manager, player, coach, go into Bayern Munich or any of the clubs of that stature. Um, I think it's more been off the fact of we've had probably it's been my worst season watching Burnley for a number of factors. Just doesn't feel right, really. That we've had to endure that for a season, and his reward is such a big job. Albeit, like you said, you can't begrudge him from taking it, really.
Is that to caveat that though? Is that also following on after arguably your best season watching Burnley?
Yeah, and I think that was it. I think it was we'd achieved so much in such a short space of time, which I think blindsided not only us but as fans, but also the board. Really, we put a lot of effort and a lot of resources into Kompany. We made a lot of signings, spent a lot of money. We were told it was part of this 5-year plan, and when sort of confidence sort of weaned a little bit last season, it was no, it all got brought back. Of it's as part of this 5-year plan, and then for us to stick with him and think the best man to take us out of the Championship is Vincent Kompany. That was sort of the light at the end of the tunnel of such a bad season last season. And obviously he's walked out of the door. So I think you've got to try and sort of categorize it as a Burnley fan of whilst you're happy for him and getting his job, for us, it's not a good end to it really. And I think even with his, and the club put on, it was a short farewell video. It was very short. It didn't really feel that sincere, to be honest. It feels like, we always knew we were a stepping stone, but it was kind of, you don't mind being a stepping stone because you think with a stepping stone comes success, not having
Yeah, that's what we
a
always
20
say. Yeah.
a 24-point season, having spent, I think it was something like sixth most net in the Premier League last season. We spent a lot of money. He's gone and done his first interview and says, I was at a small club. I agree, we're a small club in the Premier League, but says he wasn't really back, didn't have the resources, financially, and it was a bit like you had enough there to do better than what you did. So I think that was the frustration, really.
We did a pod on Patreon last week about success of failure. Yeah, how do you measure success and failure? And we covered all the Premier League teams that are going to be in the league next year. And we could make a case for all 20 clubs that it was an element of success, especially after Manchester United won the FA Cup, disastrous league season, trophy at the end. There was like something caveat, like a carrot for everybody. Arguably, the biggest failure in the league last year was Burnley,
Yeah,
I would say,
yeah, I would
because
agree.
we'd sat back last summer and we even joked, you won't want me to bring it up, Jack, but it was like, what's more likely? Sixth or 18th, wasn't it? Was what I'd said to you.
Yeah,
And we even
yeah,
debated if it was sixth.
yeah. And I genuinely thought off of seeing Dyche under all those years, and he would know you wouldn't really hear success branded around with Sean Dyche. It was great determination, and he kind of knew how to get the best out of his players. But you wouldn't often say success. It was success that was limited to us. Whereas with Vincent Kompany, you thought, wow, I think that's what we probably saw. We saw there was a really high ceiling for Vincent Kompany, and I think we probably thought that might have been with us. And when we knew we were spending the sort of money we were spending, you kind of think if we can have a record-breaking Championship season on the players that we already had, and we were adding, I think we added 14 players or something last season plus loan players, you think, wow, we're really backing this guy here. Relegation seemed far, far away from everyone's mind. We didn't even really think we'd be in a relegation scrap, let alone and
I mean, 24
got
points is
adrift.
disastrous.
Yeah, Yeah, and in a
Yeah.
season where 2 out of the teams above you had points deductions, it was, it wasn't a good look. So yeah,
I,
it was a massive failure.
I was trying to think today before this, like if Bayern had come for Ange Postecoglou, how I'd have felt if he then went, yeah, I want to go and do Bayern Munich. And I'd even come to the conclusion, it's like, well, he's Bayern. Like, if you're going to go, like probably better that than a fellow Premier League club. It's like Bayern, Real Madrid, Barcelona, like the three, just accept it. But I get the complete frustration because there's certainly a case that the football club could have sacked him, right?
Yeah,
During the course of this, again, basically a failure last season from a results perspective, and I think arguably a performance perspective for a lot of it as well. And that frustration bleeds from, well, you stuck with him and you knew you're sticking with him because he'd be the best guy to then bring you back.
yeah,
And now it's gone. And the comments afterwards, if you're saying he said, I mean, you're saying to yourself, okay, you're a small club. Don't say it, mate. You don't need to. The fan base don't need to hear that.
yeah. I think no, I'm probably doing us a bit of an injustice there. I think more in terms of if he's saying to Germany in relation to the Premier League, we're not one of the biggest clubs. I'm happy to accept that. I've heard lots of people brand around the phrase, he's a narcissistic, and I've not really seen it. I think he's worked tirelessly on and off the pitch. To be fair with the players, he's done so many coaching sessions. You can see it on the documentary. He seems like a really hardworking guy. But we had sort of became Vincent Kompany's Burnley, like you used to hear Frank Lampard's Derby County. I'm sure we'll get onto him later on as well. But then with his farewell video, I sort of felt it was an unfinished project. We kept hearing the phrase, it's a 5-year plan. It's a 5-year plan. Stick with it, and that's what we did. So for him to leave 2 years in, albeit you would never begrudge him a move to Bayern Munich, I felt like he needed to have sort of a good farewell, really, to say, thank you, and and he eventually came out with a video. It was 50 seconds long. He said Blackburn 3 times because that was his favourite match, and he mentioned Blackburn. He talked about himself,
That's a real bad slip of the tongue there. But
he said his favourite match was beating Blackburn at their place.
Yeah.
But he didn't mention the words fans once. There was no farewell. There was no thank you for standing by me. It was like a thank you for the club, but he didn't really, for me, recognise the fans. It didn't really feel that sincere. It just feels like he's basically flown out of the door, and no sooner has Bayern Munich come calling, he's gone there, and we've not even been a second thought. Which, yes, that's football, but you kind of felt would have been a bit more loyalty there, given we've given him so much back in resources and tried to stick with him, really.
Yeah. I think when you don't get acknowledged afterwards, like your part in the role of whatever that is, a support network, if you are for the last couple of years, that feels like a real slap because that's the easiest win, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is go and praise the fans and acknowledge, the fans have been behind me. I thank them for that. Yeah, it's a little strange. You'd mentioned now, narcissistic was the word you'd used. Yeah, there is speculation that he rubs people up the wrong way, doesn't give people an explanation if they're left out the team, for example. But you're saying you've not seen a lot of that.
It's hard to say, and I didn't have that opinion beforehand. I don't want to just have that opinion now he's left, sort of thing. We sort of did that open documentary I guess there was quite a bit of transparency through there. I can imagine him rubbing players up the wrong way purely because we have that many players and we've signed that many. I don't think there's a man manager in the world that could keep that many players happy, especially when results aren't going your way. There'd be players knocking on the door. So it wouldn't surprise me based on some of the things I'm hearing in between. But there's nothing I can say for certain that I've heard. Absolutely categorically he's narcissistic. So it's all a bit hearsay really. But given his interview at the end, and you just think, come on, as a manager, you've done that many interviews. You just it just rolls off the tongue when you say the fans, when a 5-0 defeat, you go, oh, thank you for the fans for supporting us today. It's just, you don't want to hear it at the time because it's just stock phrases, but it's what all managers say, and the fact that he didn't was a bit.
Do you think he resented the atmosphere a bit at Burnley, perhaps from what he'd been used to? Because you've openly said the atmosphere struggled at times. I think there's a number of reasoning for that, like the big hike in ticket prices, for example, as well. Do you think that might have played a part?
Slightly, because he sort of brushed it off because there was a couple of boos, and it was never. It was a weird atmosphere because usually when you hear boos, it's you want the manager out. It wasn't even that. We were happy, we knew we got a manager with no experience even managing in English football, let alone the Premier League. So we'd be daft to get rid of him, an inexperienced manager, so short into a Premier League campaign when we had this 5-year plan. So I think the boos were more frustrations with the performances and some of the tactics rather than aimed directly at him. But he brushed it off and he said something like, I've been playing in games where you get booed off at halftime, and I'm like, it's not normal for us. We stand by our managers and our players. Really, we're used to not being. We're not. Under Dyche, we didn't expect to win every single game in the Premier League. But, we're pretty realistic with our ambitions. It was more, some of the home games like Luton, 30-odd% possession at home, and we're supposed to have this brand of football, and we didn't always see that. So he may well have resented it, but I think that, realistically, the fans gave him more than enough support. We didn't really direct and channel any of that at him. There was bits you could say we weren't the best with certain players like James Trafford. I think the fans got on his back, and we took out an unnecessary amount of frustrations on him, really. But I think there was just frustrations all sort of all season round, and they probably just got thrown around in some of the wrong places from time to time, like it does at any club.
Be honest, when you first heard Bayern Munich, what did you think? What went through your mind?
I thought, no, it's not going to happen. But then it just seemed to happen so quickly, and there were so many journalists that you think, shit, this has got real legs to it. It was a frustration because I think for the season we've had, regardless of what team it was, it was just frustration and anger that our manager was leaving. I think the first time I'd even thought about him leaving was when you suggested it when we was playing Forest at the end of the season.
I'm glad I put the thought in your head there.
Yeah.
I probably eased the pain for you, mate.
You probably did, yeah. But I genuinely didn't give it much of a thought because you think if we can have the season in the Championship and we still keep hold of him, how can he disappear at the end of this season? But and I can hear and I probably agree with lots of arguments that last season was all about protecting brand Kompany. He played the way he wanted to play, and we didn't ask any questions of that. We let him play it, and the only really winner out of that is him.
I got some issues with this. I think one of the big narratives is he never changed. That's what I keep reading and keep hearing. He didn't change. So the team that came up largely played with a single pivot. I went to your place at the end of August, and mid-game he changed formation to back three, and it made things worse. As the season progressed, he moved into a double pivot, which briefly had some success. Then it didn't. We saw flirtations more with kind of almost like a 4-2-4 with two right up top. You'd previously had some. So the idea that is like, Vincent Kompany doesn't change. He always sticks to his principles. And you used an example, 30% possession at home to Luton. So where were the principles that night? So I think we have seen change. And that also helped bring some, your results over the last 2 months of the season actually should be acknowledged as pretty good. You lost the last 3, so it feels really flat. But the 10 before that was like 1 defeat, wasn't it? Or so?
Yeah.
So how much did he stick to his principles, mate?
Yeah, I think he still did. I think there was tweaks within there, but again, I just think it was just game managementship and stuff. It just wasn't good enough from start to finish. And even that period of sort of the 8-9 games where we did do a little bit better, it was draws, and I felt we could have gone and chased the wins more. It was all just a little bit too late, wasn't it? In the end, and it was miraculous, really, that we got within touching distance at the end. And it was like we said against Forest, it was only a couple of results here and there. Yeah, and I think I sort of agree with you in that there was. He didn't set out to lose, and whilst yes, he had his principles. We didn't complain about Sean Dyche. We didn't say, well, we expect him to play football like Pep. He had his principles, and and he stuck to them. And I think it was probably just more of a case of his were more successful. And whilst sometimes it was frustrating, I think this season was just as frustrating, knowing that teams could just walk through us. At least we had a solid base with Sean Dyche and that style of play. So yeah, you can see arguments for both, but it did just feel like with some of the team selection as well that Kompany was just playing players. that weren't in form and playing the wrong players, wrong personnel. I don't know what the reasons were, but it didn't feel like there was any pressure from the board and behind. It wasn't like the board have signed these players and they want them to play. It felt like Kompany was just experimenting and sticking with these players, and we could see that it wasn't working. But he just persisted and persisted. In the end of, we talk about that 8-9 game period, and that's when Muric came in.
Yeah, true.
It wasn't a great tactician that needed to go to Bayern Munich that could see that. I could see that from the stands, and it changed straight away when he came into the side. So I think it was a mixture of tactics, personnel that was very frustrating, to be honest.
Yeah, and I might be coming across as perhaps critical or anti Vincent Kompany here. I'm not, because to go back to that game when I came to your place in game week 4, which finished 5-2, my overriding feeling afterwards, which I'd said on the podcast, was positivity for Burnley, because everyone forgot that in the first 15 minutes of that game, we played really, really well, and we struggled at the start. And you could definitely see that there was something there. And I kept saying it week after week. There's something there. There's something there with this team. It's missing something. I think inexperience was a thing that we threw up a lot last year because it had brought largely young players. But there was always something there, something enough that this super club has come and bought. Do you feel anything emotively that Bayern Munich has come and taken from your club? Does that mean anything to you?
In terms of?
Well, I just like an appreciation for the work that the football club has done. It's not just about Vincent Kompany, is it?
Yeah, I think, and that's it. And I think that's what AOK will probably feel from themselves. I think they will feel that this is their project. Since Dyche was pretty much part of the old regime, they've come in, new manager. I think they will take great pride in that. And I think that's where we can see a real contrasting difference of when they've announced the departures of both, albeit, yes, Dyche was sacked. I felt like he should have got a much better send-off than he did, given that he got us to Europe and we had so much success. But I think the board are still madly in love with Vincent Kompany, and they see that as like their child going off to university sort of thing. They've done their bit, and they've massively helped him in his career. And I think that's the frustrating bit as well, that it hasn't, had he kept us up on the last day and then he'd have gone to Bayern Munich, it'd be a completely different. We'd have had a different take on it all. I think that's what leaves the sourest taste of wherever we've ended up. And he's sort of springboarded away from us because, let's face it, he put in a lot of hard work, but we well supported him as well. So it's just a shame that it didn't end with both parties.
There's definitely no doubt that he worked hard. There's several reports out there of how he was kind of in the training ground 7 o'clock in the morning and might still be there at 10 o'clock at night and these sort of things. There's no question that he worked really hard. It's interesting. I was just thinking when he was talking there, if Vincent suddenly picked the phone back up and went, I think I've made a mistake here. This is too big for me. Can I come back? They'd have him back, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. And I think that's been the danger, and I think we've alluded to it before, that he has had so much power at the football club. I think this has all been part of the new regime of we've wanted to try and expand, be a bit more global. I think we struck a gold mine, really. We didn't ever expect to have the success we had last season in the Championship. And I think that's what probably gave us a bit more comfort to back in the way we did, because we kind of thought, even if we go down here, we know we can do this again. And even if we can only achieve it at 90%, 75%, we know we'll be there and thereabouts, because we was just so good. And we even took our foot off the gas towards the end of that Championship season. So, I think AOK will learn from it. I think it's been a good learning point from them. I don't think they don't give me that much faith that they have that much of a footballing brain. So I think they are really learning as they go along. But every credit to them, they took a real gamble with Kompany and it paid off. So
someone's advised well there in the first instance to appoint him.
Yeah,
because it was certainly an element of a gamble to that. I want to talk Burnley more, but I also want to touch on your point about the power that Vincent Kompany had at Burnley. He ain't gonna have it at Bayern Munich.
No, absolutely not.
How do you see that playing out?
I don't know, because obviously we've made a tremendous amount of signings since Kompany's been here. I think Kompany has spent 63% of Burnley's entire history of transfer expenditure, which is mental. I don't know how much of that is purely on him and how much some of it is, some of the scouts and things behind the scenes and how much, the board do have a say in that. I can't imagine anywhere near as much as what the Bayern Munich board will have on that. But let's face it, if you've got the infrastructure as good as what you've got at Bayern Munich, it can't be a bad thing. I think the only way that will be an issue and it will clash is if Kompany is as narcissistic as what some people say. I think, if he feels he needs to have that say on that player and have to do things his certain way, then there might be a clash there. But I guess, they must have hashed that all out in the interviews. I just hope he's not changed and put on a different face purely to get in there, because I do want him to succeed. I'd love nothing more than him to succeed at there. As much as there is a sour taste, I do really genuinely wish him all the best.
Do you think he will?
Yeah, I think it's hard, because I think the only parallel I can compare it to is the Bayern Munich team that they've got currently is more similar to the team we had in the Championship, and with how hard he worked, and no disrespect to the rest of the Bundesliga, but the opposition are probably similar in comparison.
I see what you mean. He's managing the top team in the league. Yeah.
We were the Man City of the Championship in a way. We had resources far bigger than everybody else. So I think if you can get the players playing how he wants, he's got the resources, and listen, the tactics and how much more well organised we were than everyone in the Championship was clear to see. So yeah, I think I'd like to think he's learned a lot from this season. So let's face it, Bayern Munich should be, finishing second is disastrous. So I think if you're appointing a young, inexperienced coach, if he was to get second in his first season and then stick with him, you'd like to think that they'd be winning the title again within a couple of seasons.
I don't know if they stick with if Bayern Munich finish second and don't win a trophy, mate, because it's unacceptable for that club to be anything but first,
absolutely,
right? And it's no guarantee because of obviously what Xabi Alonso's doing at Leverkusen at the moment, and unless their team gets broken up, I think most of us think they'll have a very good football season again next year. But obviously, Champions League football will give them a distraction, no doubt, as well. But yeah, he's got to finish first, Jack. I think you go to Bayern Munich, you don't win the league, you're out of a job, mate. I think.
Yeah, but I mean, have I seen enough of him as a coach to say he's that much better than Xabi Alonso? I mean, I know Bayern Munich have got an incredible squad, haven't they? So you'd like to think that he's got enough to really do a job there. But I mean, let's face it, that team of Xabi Alonso's last season was ridiculous. So
what is it specifically, do you think, that's attracted them? Is it him specifically, i.e. the links to Guardiola, naturally? And obviously, bear in mind, Guardiola managed at Bayern. Or is it what they've seen with their eyes?
I think it's a mixture of both. I don't think, for example, we compare some of the names that we'll talk about in a little while. Like, for example, Liam Rosenior. If Liam Rosenior has done exactly the same as what Vincent Kompany has done in these last 2 seasons with tactics, effort, he would not be in the picture for that. So I think there's a part of it that perhaps you can go for a more inexperienced and less successful manager if they're a bigger name. So I think his name is a massive key part in him getting the job. But I think sometimes it's probably a little bit offensive to say that that's the reason why he has got the job, because he has done, he did a fantastic job for us in the Championship. I think the mistakes for us last season was, too much high turnover of personnel, and it just didn't quite work out. And let's face it, it's the toughest league in the world for a reason. So yeah, I think he'll do well. I think
he's clearly not first choice. I think that can be well acknowledged.
Yeah.
Seems like Bayern wanted to get everyone back that they previously had departures with. Hansi Flick's name was mentioned. We know there was an approach to take Julian Nagelsmann back, and then supposedly further talks with Thomas Tuchel then to try and convince him to stay. We know there was an approach for Xabi Alonso as well. We know there was an approach for Oliver Glasner for Crystal Palace, and probably should have acted a few months earlier, and you probably would have got your guy there. And then Kompany. And what it sounds like is once I spoke to Kompany, we're hugely impressed. Partly as well, obviously, he's actually fluent in German. He can speak it very well. Obviously, had a spell at Hamburg. It's just not like he's got no knowledge of Bundesliga football. He also speaks French very well. There's a large French contingent in the team. And obviously, when he spoke to him about his plans of what he want to do, his stylistics, etc., they were well impressed and then happy to pursue. And it's worth acknowledging as well, Jack, you were well compensated. I know manager fees aren't like player fees, but 12 million for a manager is a decent chunk when you might have been sacking him yourself a couple of months earlier if you'd have felt differently about things.
And paying that in wages to get rid of him.
You can see him at Man City in a couple of years now, can't you? If it goes well, if he had 2 good years at Bayern Munich and then Guardiola walked away in 2 years, you could see it then, because then he's got the big job experience as well, right?
Yeah. So I think that's it for him in his career. It's an absolute no-brainer. Everyone said that City is the one that he's got his sights set on, and it would have been a massive step up for him to go from Burnley straight to City. And I think it's been a weird end to the season for managers and the managerial sort of changes. So I think it was, it's a once in a lifetime thing for him. He had to have gone, and yeah, it's been quite public that, like you said, he was by no means first choice, but I think like you said, everything about him is, his multiculturalism, the way he can speak so many languages, and his style of play, it lends itself to a big job. Really, it's not what we would expect of the Burnley. He's transformed us with help with the vision of the board. So it's a big club mentality, really.
People were obviously impressed, and that idea had been knocking about for a while. I spoke about Tottenham and Chelsea being interested last summer. I saw Joleon Lescott say on the podcast that he's a part of with Simon Jordan, that he knew for a fact that Kompany had turned down the Tottenham job last summer. I'll caveat that by saying it doesn't mean he was offered the job.
Yeah.
But it might well mean that Vincent Kompany said, no, I don't want the Tottenham job, or told Tottenham I'm not interested, rather than he was factually first choice. That's the bit we don't know, where the lines are a bit blurred. But we definitely know the interest was there. We know there was contact with Tottenham. We know there was contact with Chelsea. The Chelsea contact makes even more sense now that they've just promoted this year's Championship winning manager as well.
Yeah.
So it's been in people's minds for a while. So what now for your club, Jack? You mentioned Liam Rosenior, who I don't watch a lot of Championship football, but to me feels like very harshly sacked by Hull City.
Yeah, agreed.
Is that kind of first choice in your mind of what you'd like?
To be honest, I'm not sure what I really want. I think it's been to go off the comparisons. The last 2 managers, we've had 2 completely different styles, but both have had the strengths and weaknesses. I think for us to be successful in the Premier League, we need to have a hybrid of both. Really, I think the style of play that Dyche played every week wasn't always the best to watch. But I think on the flip side, Kompany's was a little bit naive to think we can go and play that way against some of the best teams in the league. I would be open for us to continue with Craig Bellamy. He was obviously Vincent Kompany's assistant. He's not gone with him. And Michael Jackson, who took charge of us towards the end of the 22 season when Dyche got sacked. He did a great job, so he's still there, and I would imagine that he would be Bellamy's assistant. So that is one option. I think with the sheer amount of players that we've brought in, only the people inside the club know what the mood is like there, and I guess this might be why they're hanging on for an announcement to see what the vibe is there, whether they'd respond better to sort of the continuity with the personnel that they've been used to, because obviously a lot of these players were attracted by Vincent Kompany, or whether it is, I feel like the board might be inclined to go for a big name again, which would probably only leave like a Frank Lampard or Van Nistelrooy, because I know they're trying to do lots of stuff in like America and trying to raise the profile. So really don't know. There's not really much to go off.
Yeah, no. I get that, and one of the things that complicates it would be just our luck, Jack, that you announce something at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning and make us look a bit silly. But you go back to training on 24th of June, which from time of recording is 12 days away. There is a suggestion that you might not have an appointment in place by then. There was also a suggestion in a piece on The Athletic that the club didn't even deem it essential that they had someone in for the beginning of the season. That sounds bonkers. We've all had that, and you've had it yourself. With department manager in March, and we're going to leave someone there for 2 months, and then when more people are available in the summer, do our thing. To not appoint someone in the summer would be unheard of, no?
Yeah, I think
unless the plan is Bellamy.
Yeah,
but then why not just announce it?
I think it's different because we've got such a big squad of players. We can afford to lose 5 or 6 and we've still got a squad that's good enough to tackle the Championship, in my opinion. So I feel like looking back to when the pre-season, when we appointed Kompany and we were losing all of our key players, Pope, Tarkowski, me, Dwight McNeil, Maxwell Cornet, it was a massive rebuilding job. So I think the emphasis on getting someone in straight away probably isn't as important because we know there isn't as much of a rebuild to do. I think we will want to continue with the younger players, that style of play. I think that was a shared vision between Pace and Vincent Kompany. So I think that's probably why we feel like we're on the right direction. We just need someone to steady that ship a little bit. So I've heard pieces on the Athletic that say that they're quite happy if it was to be Bellamy, which probably is why they're probably not as in a rush to appoint somebody. But if that's their opinion, then my take on it is just give it Bellamy, put the faith in him, say before the lads are even back at pre-season, guys, this is your manager, it's who we wanted.
I don't think there's anything wrong with making sure you make the right decision. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I guess the club, it's interesting. There's probably two sides to this. The club certainly wouldn't have been expecting him to go to Bayern Munich. It might have been other clubs where there might have been feelers put out. We know these talks will get done via agents and stuff. And the club's probably gone, we ain't going there, or there. This one we would understand, obviously. But at the same time, I feel like the club should have had a plan, knowing what they wanted to do, because they knew that this was a man that was in demand previously. It could come again at any point.
This is why I say I don't.
If Guardiola had suddenly dropped the City job, Kompany would have been getting linked with a Man City job. So it's like that moment could come straight away. So it's like the plan's got to be there. That's how it feels like. Like I've said with Brighton, I deserve you when it's a shock. It's like, Brighton will know what they're doing.
Yeah,
they'll deal with it. So I think that can go both ways.
Yeah. Well, there's the main journalist that reports on us is a Belgian guy called Sasha, and he'd put something just before the season had ended saying that Burnley were exploring options for managers.
Okay.
And our chairman responded to him with a gif of Pinocchio, and it had all sort of blown up on Twitter because he was saying, "You're talking nonsense." And then obviously 4 weeks later, Kompany's out the door, and he just looks a bit of an idiot. And it's like that. What gives me the impression that I feel like you're either being the big bravado of pretending that everything's okay when it isn't, is one side of the coin, or you genuinely think that Kompany's staying and you're not even looking for options. So
I also think that, but that also could have been, I'm presuming the season wasn't finished at this point.
Yeah, and I think there was rumors
he's probably making it clear that he's not sacking the manager as well. So
yeah,
can look at it that way as well, I think.
Yeah. I think the tweet was something about a head of interest from other clubs, and it maybe named like a Brighton. I guess some people laughed it off and say, well, he wasn't wrong because he wasn't going to Brighton; he was going somewhere much bigger. So yeah, I don't know, to be honest.
Some people would prefer Brighton to Munich. I'm just saying, I'm going to put that out there. You mentioned a number of names linked with the job. I'm a little bit suspicious about Liam Rosenior because 24 hours prior to this recording, it sounded like he was going to go to Sunderland. That's now not the case, we think. Frank Lampard's name keeps coming up, but during the course of today, there's been a big surge for someone whose name you haven't mentioned yet. And there's some people will say, to your stance of, well, maybe the club do think they're looking far and wide. If they appoint Scott Parker, there's a suggestion perhaps they're not looking far and wide enough, is what some people would say. He's odds on now with the bookies at this moment.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, a bit indifferent, really. I don't really know that much about him. I think he's done obviously a good job, but then he's fallen out of favour and fallen out with the boards a little bit, hasn't he? So open to it, I suppose. I guess the board would need to know how he fits in with their vision and what they need to do next. I think we need to get the appointment right, and I think that's what we said. They would be happy to wait, and I think we need to look into more of a director of football model like what Brighton, Brentford do. It needs to be now that the signings are for us and for our sort of plan rather than what we give the manager. Because obviously our 5-year plan, our plans just walked out of our main part of the plan just walked out of the door. So I think it needs to all intrinsically link.
Is there a case to say though that the plan now, having, I mean, it's fair to say, gone up quicker than perhaps was the plan?
Yeah.
Because it was concerned when you got relegated. I'd said to you, I'm
absolutely
as concerned that you'll keep going
Finances weren't great at all.
Yeah, we didn't know quite what the plans were about ALK. You hear investment company coming in, you get a bit nervous. I think it's fair to say they've looked after the club. They've certainly invested. No one could argue that. But I just wonder, having now tasted it again, if there might be well, maybe we look at someone to get us back and then look at something else. I wonder, rather than let's get this perfect plan. If we're not sure we've got the right guy for the perfect plan, are we better off getting someone to get us back out of this and then look at that plan to stabilize it better? Because the one thing you'd certainly say about Scott Parker is he knows how to get out of the division, right? He's done it with two similar sized clubs in Fulham and Bournemouth.
Yeah. Yeah, you can argue that. I don't personally like the idea of just getting out of the Championship, because let's face it, that's the easier out of. It's easier to probably to do that than start to get an established Premier League team. And I think for us last season, what our downfall is all that momentum we built and all the players that we sort of gave debuts to and really got them up to our standard. We then neglected them. So I really think we could, if we get the appointment right and build that confidence, that's what we should look to do, and for us to carry on in that vein rather than rip it up and start again, because that's what we did, albeit Kompany stayed. It felt like it was a new side again. We've mentioned Lampard, and first impressions, he was quite underwhelming, but then the more and more I think about it, I think, he had a decent first season at Chelsea, brought some younger players through. Yes, he went to Everton and didn't do too great there, but I don't think there's many managers that could have gone to Everton under their circumstances and shown. I think starting in Championship with a decent squad like we've got and some young players is quite an attractive job. And I think we should look to get the right appointment now rather than going for that manager to get us out of the division. So if the board agree that Scott Parker is only that, I would rather us roll the dice and go for somebody else and even stick with a Bellamy or go for somebody else if that's all they see for Scott Parker as.
Remind you of that when they appoint Scott Parker before I release this podcast, mate. You mentioned a really good point there, which I think is a nice way to close. One thing that comes out of this, and I think the club's been open to the idea of people coming in and not standing in their way. If they prove to be good enough and a bigger caliber club wants to buy, the idea is to buy young, improve, sell higher. It seems like a safe model, basically. People will see Vincent Kompany coming out of Burnley and think that can be me.
Yeah.
I think. And I think out of this might come some really good long-term good for Burnley, that people won't forget that. People aren't going to forget that, okay, you can say it's Vincent Kompany, yeah, but it came out of Burnley. Why did it come out of Burnley? Because he implemented this at Burnley. So the narrative, the whole Sean Dyche era, which we know it was obviously emotively meant so much to the people there, it's gone. And now you're looking at this forward-thinking football club who people can now, I think, even see a career path. And that might even be for the manager that comes in as well, who then, well, if I'm the Vincent Kompany, if I go in and implement my things there, that could be me as well. And I know everybody wants their own club to be the biggest club in the world, but I also know that you're realistic, Jack.
Yeah.
And if the Bayern Munich comes in, shit's going to happen, because it would happen to most of us as well. Anyway, mate, I wish you the very best of luck for the new season, mate. Bookies currently have you second favourites behind Leeds. Have they got that right?
I think it's more. There's so much up in the air for us, I guess, isn't there? It's hard to predict. I think with not having a manager, it's even more hard to predict. But I think based on the squad that we had last time and how well we did, it'd be hard for us to cock it up. To get above 100 points, and we've added better players to that. If we keep hold of like a Sander Berger, even if like an Odobert goes, we've still got plenty of wingers in there. I think we'll be fine. We should have more than enough for that division.
A few are going to have to go. I think that's good. James Trafford looks like he's definitely going to go, doesn't he?
Yeah. Weghorst needs to go this season.
Weghorst. Is Connor Roberts still looking for him? Do we know that or not?
Well, they'll be back in training, won't they, in a couple of weeks?
Irony, they'll both be back.
Yeah, I think Roberts might be on his way out. I think Benson's a Rory. They fell out of favour last season. Scott Twine supposedly going. So I think Odobert, there'll probably be teams coming in for him, I would have thought. Berger's the one for me.
Asho probably get looked at as well, despite the injury.
Yeah. So I think if we can keep hold of Sander Berger, he's the main one for me. think that's what we're saying. There'll be a few departures. I don't think there'll be anywhere near as many incomings. So I think we just look to stabilise and put our eggs in the basket that we've got, really, because we changed it up far too much last season. So
Yeah,
interesting pre-season to have.
Despite me being a little critical here of Kompany, I think it's partly through astonishment that most of us can't believe that Bayern Munich have actually done this, and it may well work. I forgot my point, Jack. I've gone. It's too late in the evening. I've forgotten what my point is. I'll tell you what I think about. I'm going to say, who's that gentleman on your shirt? While I try and remember.
Jeremy Corbyn, an England shirt.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting thing to promote on my podcast. How are England going to do this summer?
I've been getting all up in the hype and the excitement. I was like, I think we'll do pretty well. And then you remember, like, shit, France have got Mbappe, and then there's Germany and Portugal. So yeah, I think it's probably the luck of the draw, really, isn't it? I think we should be there and thereabouts with our squad, but I feel like we always bottle it, don't we? To be a little bit negative and pessimistic there.
It's like that Iceland. It shouldn't happen, but that Iceland game sucked all the positivity out of all of us. I mean, I actually feel really different to what I felt this time last week.
Yeah,
and I also can't remember my point on Vincent Kompany at all. I've completely forgotten. Just going around in circles. Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go and have a late night hot chocolate. Jack, thank you very much. Anything you want to plug before we go, mate?
No, just the usual at Turfy Topper on the X app, or follow me Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days.
I remember what it was. It's rubbish. It's so irrelevant now. What I was going to say was, I'd said to you a few times, very confident you'll come straight back. And I feel less now he's gone about that.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Which is interesting. But also, I certainly take your point and agree that you could lose a number of players here, and this group of players should still be good enough to come back, particularly with the other two that have come down with you, who are just not equipped to push in the same way that you'll be able to. If you then need to go invest, if you do get 20 million for Trafford, etc., etc.
I think it helps with the getting the money for Kompany as well, though, because that helps steady the books a little bit. So although it's a bit more doom and gloom because we think, it's the uncertainty, that 12 million means we might not have to sell an extra one of, it might have been we had to sell Odeberg and Berger. No, it might not. Might only need to be the one. God, we're falling to bits, the pair of us, aren't we?
Yeah, it's both going to have hot chocolate. Not together, by the way, kids. Have you got any players at the Euros?
Don't think so.
No, well, there'll be no Burnley players in mine and Such finals Euro fantasy drafts that we'll be going through on the podcast tomorrow ahead of the European Championship start on Friday night. Jack, thank you very much, mate. Best of luck next season. Cue music, please, man child.